I am Harrison. I am 29 years old. Just a few short weeks ago, my very own brother stole $15,950 in cold, hard cash right out of my childhood bedroom. That money was the college fund I had practically bled for, sacrificing my own life, my savings, and my sanity to secure his future when our family hit rock bottom. And while I was standing there, staring at the empty, dusty space under the floorboards where that money used to be, my parents actually had the nerve to defend him. They looked me dead in the eye, standing in the very kitchen where I grew up eating their leftovers and watching them favor him, and said, "He just wants to fit in, Harrison. You make a good salary, don't ruin the family over a few dollars." They chose to protect a thief over their own loyal son. They humiliated me, treating my hard-earned money like it was just some community pot they were entitled to, laughing off my boundaries as if I were a difficult child throwing a tantrum. But there was one massive thing they did not know. They didn't know I had already uncovered his secondary scheme to steal my identity and saddle me with crushing debt. And they certainly didn't know that I had the legal documents and a massive career promotion ready to drop like a nuclear bomb on their perfect little reality. And right now, they are the ones begging for my help, terrified of a looming lawsuit, realizing they pushed the wrong son too far. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my family's golden pedestal and took back my life, hit that like button if you believe in absolute, unapologetic justice. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. It helps me know I am not speaking into the void. Now, let's go back to the moment the illusion shattered. The floorboard in my old bedroom used to hide my childhood secrets. It was a loose piece of oak, right in the corner of the room near the radiator, mostly covered by a faded blue rug. When I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, it was where I kept the things I valued most. Baseball cards, old handwritten notes from friends, a few pieces of Halloween candy I didn't want anyone else to steal, and later on, the meager tips I made from bagging groceries. It was my safe space in a house that always felt a little too crowded, a little too loud, even when it was completely empty. It was the only corner of the world that belonged entirely to me. This time, as I knelt on that familiar faded carpet, the floorboard hid absolutely nothing. I had carefully pried it open with a flathead screwdriver, expecting to see the thick, heavy manila envelope I had placed there just days before. Instead, I saw nothing but years of accumulated dust, a few dead spiders caught in ancient cobwebs, and the stale, suffocating air where my future and my brother's salvation should have been resting. $15,950. Gone. Evaporated into thin air. I sat there on the floor for a very long time. I looked at the gray dust coating my fingertips. My heartbeat was entirely steady. There was no rushing of blood in my ears, no sudden gasp for air, no dizzying panic, and absolutely not a single tear in my eyes. I think when you are betrayed by the people who are supposed to share your blood, your brain just shuts off the emotional valves to keep you from literally dying of a broken heart. You cross a threshold where pain transforms into a cold, clinical numbness. I didn't feel betrayed in that specific second. I felt validated. I felt like the universe had finally pulled back the curtain and showed me the ugly, undeniable truth I had been trying to ignore for 24 years. Outside my bedroom door, echoing down the long, carpeted hallway, came the distinct, heavy sound of expensive shopping bags rustling against each other. It was a crisp, papery sound, accompanied by the squeak of brand-new designer sneakers on the hardwood floor. It was my younger brother, Julian. He was humming some upbeat pop song, completely carefree, his voice carrying the entitled, obnoxious melody of a guy who had never faced a single consequence in his life. He walked with the heavy, arrogant steps of someone who firmly believed the universe owed him a red carpet wherever he went. He thought I would break down. He knew I was home, and he knew exactly what I was going to find in that room. He was probably waiting for the moment I would storm out of the bedroom, red-faced, screaming, veins popping out of my neck. He expected me to fall apart, to beg him to explain why he did it, to demand answers. He expected the usual, exhausting routine that had defined our entire sibling dynamic. Julian makes a catastrophic mess, Harrison gets upset, our parents step in to mediate, Harrison ultimately fixes it, and Julian gets a gentle slap on the wrist and a warm dinner. He thrived on that drama. He fed on the attention of being the troubled, misunderstood youngest child who just needed a little more grace, a little more time, a little more of my money. Instead of giving him that satisfaction, I carefully placed the wooden floorboard back into its slot. I pressed it down firmly, making sure it was flush with the rest of the floor. I wiped the dust off my hands onto the thighs of my jeans. I stood up slowly, rolled my shoulders back to release the tension, took a deep, steadying breath, and I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a smile of relief or amusement. It was the terrifying, predatory smile of a man who had just been handed the exact weapon he needed to cut his heavy, suffocating chains forever. It was the smile of someone who realizes the game is over, and he is holding all the winning cards. Julian had absolutely no idea what was coming next. To understand why that specific smile was a death sentence for his arrogance, you have to understand the toxic gravity of our family. You have to look past the manicured lawn and the polite holiday cards, and see the rot that had been festering in the foundation of the Wilson household for decades. The Wilson house always looked so incredibly calm from the outside. If you drove past our property on any given Sunday, you would see fresh white paint, perfectly trimmed hedges, and a neatly paved driveway without a single oil stain. We lived in a neighborhood that took its HOA meetings far too seriously, a place where appearances were treated as absolute gospel. We looked like the kind of family that smelled like fresh laundry soap, baked apple pies, and peaceful Sunday dinners. We were the poster family for middle-class American stability. But inside those walls, behind the heavy mahogany front door, that calm was nothing but an exhaustingly well-rehearsed act. My parents, Richard and Margaret, built our lives on relentless work and rigid, unforgiving structure. My dad ran production lines at a large manufacturing plant on the edge of town. He was a man of few words, working mandatory overtime until his back gave out and his hands grew calloused and permanently stained with grease. My mom was a high school history teacher, constantly grading endless stacks of essays at the kitchen table until midnight, her eyes red, tired, and hidden behind thick reading glasses. We were never wealthy. We didn't take vacations to Europe or buy brand new cars. We were just steady. But there was a stark, undeniable difference in how that steadiness was applied to the two sons in the house. I learned very early on, through 1,000 tiny, daily rejections, that I had to earn every single thing I wanted. Julian learned that he only had to ask, and the world would bend to accommodate him. Julian was born 5 years after me. He was the quintessential miracle baby, arriving right around the time my dad finally got a decent promotion to a management position, and my mom had enough seniority at her school district to actually take her summers off. From the exact moment he took his first breath in the hospital, he sparkled in their eyes. He had the dimples, the bright blue eyes, and this incredibly manipulative charm that could turn a polite request into an absolute command. Everyone adored him. The neighbors, his elementary school teachers, even the cashier at the local grocery store remembered his name and gave him free candy. He was a golden retriever in human form, constantly demanding and receiving affection. When I tried to set a boundary or say no to him, I was instantly labeled the serious one, the difficult child, or the jealous older brother. But when Julian cried, when he threw a fit, the entire world immediately rearranged itself to make him comfortable. By the time I was in high school, our differences had solidified into unbreakable, unspoken family laws. I worked part-time at a local supermarket, stacking heavy cans of soup and mopping floors after school just to afford gas money and a cheap pair of sneakers. Julian joined the debate team, the soccer team, and the drama club, coming home with shiny ribbons and expecting a grand, catered celebration every single time he participated in anything. When I asked my dad for a used, refurbished laptop for my senior project, he gave me a gruff lecture on the value of $1, the importance of hard work, and told me to save my own money. He said it would build character. When Julian wanted the newest smartphone because his friends had it and he felt left out, it miraculously appeared on the kitchen counter in a shiny box before the weekend, accompanied by a hug from my mother. It honestly felt like living through a bitter divorce where I was the spouse being constantly penalized, while Julian got full custody of my parents' affection, resources, and patience. It wasn't exactly jealousy that I felt. It was just the crushing, suffocating weight of gravity. Everything in our house orbited around the golden child. I was just a satellite existing solely to support his trajectory. Fast forward to my adult years. I had managed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my hometown. I moved to Boston, clawing my way into a solid, high-paying job in the competitive tech sector. I was 29, making a great salary, but the cost of living was absolutely brutal. The real estate market in Boston is a joke, and I was working 80-hour weeks just to build a decent 401k, pay my exorbitant rent, and save for a modest apartment of my own. My life was defined by long hours, cold coffee, and constant, unrelenting pressure. At work, I had this rival, a guy named Derek. Derek was the corporate version of Julian, charming, manipulative, taking credit for my code, and constantly trying to undermine my projects to steal a massive promotion we were both gunning for. I was fighting battles on every front. The stress was physically changing me. My colleague and closest friend, Clara, used to look at me across the break room table and tell me I looked like a ghost. She was the only one who saw how hard I was pushing myself. She constantly warned me that my family was going to bleed me dry if I didn't set boundaries. I didn't listen to her. I thought I could outwork the exhaustion. Then the family crisis hit. The economy shifted, and my dad's manufacturing plant downsized drastically. His hours were cut in half. His pride was shattered. My mom had to pick up private tutoring on weekends just to cover the basic utility bills and the mortgage. When I heard the news, I genuinely thought this financial reality check would finally force things to balance out. I thought Julian, who was now 24 and perpetually floating through college changing his major every semester, would finally have to step up, get a part-time job, and contribute. He didn't. Instead, Julian's massive university tuition came due right as my parents' bank accounts ran completely dry. They were facing disaster. I remember visiting home during a long weekend and hearing my mom whispering late at night in the kitchen to my dad. I was standing in the dark hallway, listening to the panic in her voice. "We will make it work, Richard. We always do. We can't let him drop out now. It would ruin his confidence. He's so fragile right now. We have to find the money." But they didn't mean they would make it work. They didn't have any money to pull from. They meant I would make it work. I was their insurance policy. When my dad officially called me a week later to ask for help with the tuition, I didn't even hesitate. That is the true sickness of being the reliable older sibling. You are deeply conditioned from birth to fix things, to be the shock absorber for the family's failures. "I'll cover it," I said over the phone, pacing in my tiny Boston apartment, looking out at the city skyline. Saying those 3 words meant draining a massive chunk of my hard-earned savings. It meant pausing my 401k contributions for a year. It meant putting my own life, my own dreams of buying real estate, completely on hold. $15,950. That wasn't just a number on a screen to me. That concrete number represented every freelance side project I took on weekends, every vacation I skipped, every time I walked past a nice restaurant and told myself, "You're fine. You don't need much. Cook pasta at home." It was my sweat, my lost sleep, my youth, condensed into a stack of paper. I decided to pull the money out in cash. I know it sounds paranoid, but I didn't want to wire it directly to Julian's bank account because I knew he had a long, documented history of accidentally spending his school funds on lifestyle expenses, clothes, and concert tickets. I wanted to physically drive to the university financial office and hand the cash to the bursar myself. I wanted total control over the transaction. So, during my next weekend visit home, I tucked that thick manila envelope of cash under the loose floorboard in my old bedroom. Felt deeply symbolic. The money meant to secure his bright, shining future was resting in the exact dark, hidden space where I used to keep my own modest childhood dreams. The day I put that envelope there, I walked downstairs and told Julian what I was doing. I told him we would go to the campus together on Monday morning to pay it. He ran up to me and hugged me tighter than he had in years. He smelled like expensive cologne and privilege. "You are the best brother in the world, Harrison. Seriously, I owe you my life," he said, flashing those perfect, straight teeth. I believed him. For a very brief, pathetic moment, I let my guard down and believed him. We had a great family dinner that night. There was laughter. My parents looked relieved, the stress lines temporarily erased from their faces. There were grand promises from Julian about buckling down, studying harder, and making me proud. But normal was a carefully constructed illusion in the Wilson house. And illusions always crack under pressure. 3 days before Julian's tuition payment was strictly due, my tech company sent me on a mandatory short-notice work trip to Seattle. It was a massive industry conference, and the CEO of our company, Mr. Harrington, personally requested that I attend to present our new software architecture. It was a huge career opportunity, the exact kind of visibility I needed to finally beat Derek for the promotion. I would leave early Thursday morning and take a red-eye flight back late Sunday night. Before I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the airport, I stood in the kitchen and looked Julian straight in the eye. He was sitting at the island, mindlessly scrolling through his phone. "I am back Sunday night. Monday morning we drive to the campus and pay the bursar together. Do not mess around this weekend, Julian. Be ready at 8 a.m. sharp." I warned him, my voice firm. He nodded without looking up from his screen, sipping his $6 iced coffee. "Don't worry, Harrison. I've got all my paperwork ready. Have a safe flight. Bring me back a souvenir." The conference in Seattle was grueling but incredibly successful. I barely slept, fueled by cheap hotel coffee and adrenaline. Mr. Harrington was impressed with my presentation, and for the first time in months, I felt like my career was truly on track. But when I finally walked through the front door of my parents' house late Sunday night, dragging my suitcase behind me, the atmosphere felt entirely wrong. It was too quiet. It was too clean. My parents were already asleep upstairs, which was perfectly normal for a Sunday night. But there was a faint, lingering scent hanging heavily in the hallway air. It smelled like the fragrance section of a high-end department store. A mix of rich leather, expensive cologne, and something sweet and cloying. I brushed it off, blaming it on my travel exhaustion and the recycled air of the airplane, and dragged myself to bed. The next morning, sunlight sliced through the cheap plastic blinds of my old room, hitting my face and waking me up. I stretched, my back aching from the plane ride, and immediately rolled out of bed. I knelt by the loose floorboard in the corner to grab the money for the university trip. I pried the wood up. My hand reached into the dark, familiar space. My fingers brushed against the thick paper envelope. I pulled it out. My stomach immediately dropped. It was too light, way too light. I ripped the flap open and froze completely. It was totally empty. Not a single $100 bill was left. For a long, agonizing moment, the entire world went completely still. I could only hear the low hum of the kitchen refrigerator vibrating through the floorboards and the faint, rhythmic drip of the bathroom faucet down the hall. I tore my room apart in a frantic blur. I checked the drawers of my old desk, throwing papers on the floor. I checked the back of the closet, rummaging through old winter coats. Nothing. I checked the window lock. Secure. There was absolutely no sign of a forced entry. My expensive work laptop was sitting right on the bed in plain sight. My backup hard drives, an old silver watch I kept on the dresser, everything of value was completely untouched. The only thing missing was the $15,950 in untraceable cash. Logic kicked in sharp, cold, and unforgiving. Who had access to this house? Who knew about the floorboard? Only family. My dad would never steal. His pride was too monumental, and he viewed theft as the ultimate sin. My mom would rather starve in the street than take a dime without asking, terrified of conflict. That left exactly one name, Julian. But I am a software engineer. I do not operate on assumptions or accusations. I operate on hard data and undeniable proof. I walked into the shared bathroom to splash freezing cold water on my face and clear my racing thoughts. As I reached for a hand towel, something in the small wicker trash can caught my eye. Poking out from beneath a pile of crumpled tissues and empty toothpaste tubes were stiff, glossy pieces of paper. I pulled them out carefully, my hands shaking slightly, and smoothed them flat on the bathroom counter. Receipts. They were not from Walmart, Target, or the local diner. They were from Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus, and a boutique Gucci store downtown. I read the items listed. A pair of limited edition sneakers, a designer bomber jacket, 3 luxury silk shirts. The totals printed in bold black ink blurred together in front of my eyes. $895, $612, $347, $1,200. The numbers were staggering. And the dates printed at the top of the receipts? They perfectly matched the exact 3 days I was away in Seattle. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror for a very long time. My jaw was locked so tight my teeth physically ached. My pulse was a slow, heavy, deafening drum in my chest. He didn't just take the money. He blew it. He incinerated my sacrifice on clothes he didn't need just to impress people who didn't care about him. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen, and opened Instagram. Julian had blocked my main account 2 years ago after I called him out for partying during finals week, claiming I was ruining his vibe. But he was far too arrogant to remember the burner account I had created back when he first started college, just to make sure he was staying safe at fraternity parties. I searched his handle. His latest stories hit me like a physical punch to the gut. The first photo was a wide shot of his bed, covered entirely in high-end shopping bags from the exact stores on the receipts. The caption, written in an obnoxious font, read, "Treating my crew to the best weekend ever. Blessed. #self-made." The next video clip showed him sitting at a VIP table in a ridiculous, overpriced downtown club. The lighting was neon. The music was deafening. He was laughing loudly, holding up a crystal glass of champagne, and heavily flashing a brand new, oversized gold watch to the camera. The kind of watch that costs more than 3 months of my rent in Boston. He panned the camera to show a table full of hangers on cheering for him. Then, right at that exact moment, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message from Marcus, an old college buddy of mine who lived in the same city. "Hey man," the text read, "saw your little brother at Morello's Steakhouse last night. Kid was dropping cash like crazy, picking up the tab for a table of 8, tipping the waitress's $100 bills. Did he hit the lottery or an inheritance or something? Hope you're doing well." I stared at the glowing screen. I didn't reply. The boiling, chaotic anger inside me suddenly stopped bubbling, cooled down rapidly, freezing into absolute, pure, terrifying clarity. I walked back to my bedroom and picked up the empty envelope from the bed. I looked inside carefully, shining my phone flashlight into the corners. Half stuck in the bottom corner, caught on a bit of glue, was a small, folded piece of paper he had missed in his sloppy rush. I pulled it out. It was a bank deposit slip. He hadn't just spent the money on luxury goods. He had deposited a chunk of it to pay off his own massive, hidden debts. The deposit was for $1,000. And right there on the bottom line was his full name, Julian Wilson, his messy, looping signature verifying the transaction. But that wasn't the worst part. When I flipped the deposit slip over, I saw a secondary piece of paper stapled to it. It was a carbon copy of a credit card application form. I read the details, my blood running cold. The applicant name was Julian Wilson. The guarantor name, the person legally responsible if he defaulted on the massive credit line he was applying for, was Harrison Wilson. Me. He had used my social security number, which he clearly found by digging through my old tax files stored in the basement, and he had forged my signature at the bottom of the document. He didn't just steal my cash. He was actively trying to steal my financial identity. He was setting me up to carry his luxury lifestyle debt for years, risking my credit score, my ability to buy real estate, my entire future. It was financial abuse, plain and simple, and it was a federal crime. And yet, instead of exploding, instead of kicking a hole in the drywall or screaming until my lungs gave out, I felt an eerie, overwhelming calm. It was the specific kind of calm that washes over you when a massive, life-altering decision has already been finalized in your mind. The Harrison who would protect his family at all costs died in that room. I knew exactly what Julian would do. He would walk through the front door soon, expecting the same old toxic family pattern. He would expect me to yell, he would cry, my parents would intervene, and I would eventually swallow my pride and fix his mess because family is everything. But not today. I was absolutely done being the sacrificial lamb for his fragile ego. This time, my silence would be my weapon. I walked downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and waited for the execution. The heavy oak front door slammed shut just after 2 in the afternoon. The brass keys clattered noisily into the ceramic bowl by the entryway, a sound I had heard 1,000 times before. Then came the sound I had been patiently waiting for all morning. The thick, unmistakable sound of premium paper, shopping bags brushing heavily against each other. It was the chaotic, unapologetic rhythm of someone who firmly believed they had just pulled off the perfect crime and was untouchable. Julian appeared in the kitchen doorway. His cheeks were flushed with excitement. His hair was perfectly styled with expensive product, and he was dressed like he had literally walked straight out of a high-end boutique advertisement. A new designer jacket draped over his shoulders. For massive, glossy shopping bags dangled heavily from his wrists. The heavy gold watch on his left arm glinted obnoxiously under the warm afternoon kitchen lights. He was humming again, but he stopped dead in his tracks the second he saw me sitting perfectly still at the kitchen table, my laptop open, staring directly at him. His smug expression vanished instantly, replaced by a flash of genuine, deer-in-the-headlights panic. "Oh, hey," he stammered, his voice jumping up an octave in surprise. I thought you were still in Seattle until tonight. Didn't your flight get delayed?" "I wrapped the conference up early," I said. My voice was perfectly even, low, and completely devoid of any emotion. I sounded like a stranger. It was a very productive trip. I got a lot done. Cool. That's cool. His laugh was thin, nervous, scraping against the suffocating silence of the room. He awkwardly tried to shift the heavy bags behind his legs, shuffling his feet to keep them out of my direct sight line. "How was the weather out there?" "Raining as usual. Surprisingly nice," I replied, not breaking eye contact. I slowly closed my laptop with a soft, deliberate click. I leaned back in my wooden chair, folding my arms across my chest. "Looks like you've been extremely busy today, too. And this weekend." He glanced down at the bags, his face turning a blotchy, uneven red. He swallowed hard and tried to force his signature charming smile, the one that always worked on our mother. "Oh, these? Yeah, just end-of-season sales, you know? Found some crazy bargains at the mall. Thought I'd update my wardrobe before classes start." "Right?" I said softly, my eyes locking onto his, refusing to let him look away. "Some very impressive bargains." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipts I had meticulously retrieved from the bathroom trash. I placed them gently on the wooden table and smoothed them out flat with the palm of my hand, one by one. The sound of the crisp paper against the wood was deafening. "I honestly didn't know Gucci and Saks were doing 70% off clearance sales," I said, tracing the $1,200 total with my index finger. All the color completely drained from Julian's face. He looked like all the blood in his body had suddenly rushed to his feet. He looked like he was going to vomit right there on the linoleum. You went through my personal stuff?" He shot back, his voice shaking. He tried to immediately pivot to fake outrage, his classic defense mechanism when cornered. "What is wrong with you, Harrison? You're snooping through my trash now." "Bathroom trash," I corrected him coldly, leaning forward slightly. "It's a shared space, Julian. If you're gonna steal 15 grand, try shredding your evidence next time instead of throwing it next to the toothpaste." He dropped the heavy shopping bags onto the floor. They hit the ground with a heavy, expensive thud, items spilling slightly out of the top. His hands started trembling visibly. The golden child facade was crumbling to dust in real time. Okay, look. He held his hands up defensively, stepping backward. I took a little bit of the cash. Just a little. I was going to pay you back, Harrison, I swear to God. You make good money in Boston. It's not like you're going to miss it or go bankrupt over a few grand. I needed it. A little bit? I tilted my head, genuinely amazed by the sheer magnitude of his delusion. I pulled the empty brown manila envelope from my jacket and tossed it next to the receipts. It slid across the table and stopped at the edge. It's completely empty, Julian. Every single dollar. His voice suddenly rose into a desperate, whiny pitch, echoing off the kitchen walls. You are overreacting. You always do this. You act like you're so perfect. I just wanted to feel normal for once in my damn life. Okay? Everyone at my university has nice things. They drive nice cars, they wear nice clothes, they go on spring break. I am so sick and tired of being the poor kid in the group. I look like a joke next to them. You were never poor, I said quietly, the white-hot anger vibrating just under my skin, kept perfectly in check. You were helped. Every single step of your life you were handed things you never earned, never worked for, and never appreciated. There is a massive difference between being poor and being a parasite. Well, there's a difference to you, he yelled, his face contorting. His eyes began to shimmer with tears. I couldn't tell if they were real tears of panic because he got caught, or the heavily rehearsed tears he used to manipulate our mother into forgiving him. Harrison, please don't tell Mom and Dad. You know Dad's blood pressure is high. It will kill them to hear this. I will return everything tomorrow. I swear on my life. I'll take it all back. Just give me some time to fix this. I didn't answer him right away. I let the absolute silence in the kitchen stretch out, wrapping around him like a noose. No yelling. No aggressive threats. No dramatic ultimatums. I just let the crushing, undeniable weight of exactly what he had done hang thick and heavy in the air between us. I watched him squirm under my gaze, watching a boy who had never faced reality suddenly realize the walls were closing in. Julian. I finally spoke, my tone carrying absolute, terrifying finality. Tomorrow is Monday. It is the absolute final deadline for your tuition payment. The university made that very clear. Dad is expecting a confirmation email from the university bursar tomorrow afternoon, stating that the payment went through. He blinked rapidly, wiping a tear from his cheek with the back of his hand. He looked confused, his brain desperately trying to find an escape hatch. Right? So, we go tomorrow morning and explain we need a payment plan? Or, wait. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he looked at my face and realized I wasn't moving. I wasn't grabbing my keys. I wasn't offering a solution. You're not. Harrison, you're not going to pay it again? No, you can't be serious. If I don't pay tomorrow, they will literally drop all my classes. I'll be kicked out. I looked at my brother, the golden child who had never faced a single consequence in his 24 years of privileged existence. For once in my life, I said, my voice steady as stone, cold and unyielding, I am entirely serious. The room went completely, terrifyingly still. The air felt sucked out of the space. And then he exploded. Julian burst into a chaotic, messy, pathetic mix of pleading, screaming, and furious anger. He threw every single emotion he had ever successfully used to manipulate his way out of trouble against the wall, hoping something would stick. He called me a terrible brother. He called me selfish, a narcissist, a sociopath. He fell to his knees on the linoleum, begging. He threatened to run away and never speak to the family again. He threatened to tell our parents I was the one who lost the money gambling. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't raise my voice to defend myself. I just sat there, arms crossed, watching his tantrum burn itself out like a cheap, defective firework. It took a full 10 minutes of manic screaming and crying. When he finally ran out of words, breath, and energy, he slumped against the lower kitchen cabinets, resting his head on his knees. He looked incredibly small, pathetic, and utterly broken. You always fix everything, he whispered, staring blankly at the floorboards, his voice hoarse. "Not anymore," I replied. I stood up, grabbed my laptop off the table, and turned away, leaving him alone on the kitchen floor surrounded by his designer bags and his impending ruin. I walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs, letting his fresh round of sobbing echo behind me. In the quiet of the upstairs hallway, something deep inside my chest shifted permanently. A heavy weight I hadn't realized I was carrying suddenly vanished. It wasn't satisfaction, not yet, but it was absolute, unshakable resolve. This was not about petty revenge. This was the very first real, solid boundary I had ever drawn in my entire life, and it was the first concrete wall he was ever going to have to crash into at full speed. I walked into my bedroom, the room where he stole my future, and locked the door behind me. The real storm was going to hit tomorrow morning when our parents woke up and the school called. And for the first time in 29 years, I was completely ready for it. Monday morning arrived with a suffocating, heavy tension that you could practically taste in the air of the Wilson house. The sun was shining brightly through the kitchen windows, casting long, cheerful shadows across the worn linoleum floor. It was the kind of crisp, beautiful morning that completely mocked the absolute disaster that was about to unfold. I woke up early, exactly at 6 in the morning, feeling more rested and clear-headed than I had in years. I didn't feel the usual knot of anxiety in my stomach. I put on a crisp, perfectly ironed button-down shirt, poured myself a large cup of black coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. I was ready. I was the architect of the boundary they were all about to hit. By 7:30, my parents came downstairs. My dad was humming a cheerful tune, looking visibly relieved. He was wearing his good khaki trousers and a pressed polo shirt, the outfit he usually reserved for church or important homeowner association meetings. He was fully prepared to drive down to the university campus and secure his youngest son's future. My mom was bustling around the stove, flipping pancakes, a soft, content smile plastered on her face. They both looked like people who firmly believed they had just dodged a massive bullet, entirely unaware that the gun was still fully loaded and pointed right at their perfectly curated lives. Then Julian walked into the kitchen. He looked like a walking ghost. His skin was a sickly, pale shade of gray, and there were deep, dark, purple bags under his eyes. He clearly hadn't slept a single minute the night before. He was wearing an old, faded college sweatshirt and sweatpants, completely abandoning the high-end designer clothes he had flaunted just the afternoon prior. He kept his eyes glued to the floorboards, absolutely terrified to even glance in my direction. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, his hands shaking so violently he had to immediately hide them under his thighs to stop them from rattling against the wood. "Big day today, Julian," my dad said cheerfully, taking a massive bite of his pancake. "We will head over to the campus administration building right after breakfast. Get this tuition mess sorted out once and for all. Harrison, I really can't thank you enough for doing this. You truly saved our family. We will pay you back, every single cent. I promise you that." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The ceramic mug was warm against my hands. "You don't need to thank me, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice completely neutral and devoid of any underlying emotion. Julian visibly flinched. He opened his mouth, probably to try and spin some desperate last-minute lie. Maybe he was going to claim he had moved the money for safekeeping, or that someone had broken into the house during the night while we were sleeping. But before he could formulate a single pathetic syllable, the landline phone mounted on the kitchen wall began to ring. In the modern era of cell phones, the old landline ringing at 8 in the morning was almost always a harbinger of terrible news. My mom wiped her hands on her floral apron, a slight frown creasing her forehead, and picked up the heavy plastic receiver. "Hello? Yes, this is Margaret Wilson," she said pleasantly, her teacher voice automatically kicking in. Then her smile faltered entirely. The color began to rapidly drain from her cheeks, leaving her looking hollow. "Oh, I see. Yes, Julian is my son. Wait, what do you mean the deadline was Friday? I thought we had until the end of business today." The letter said Monday. She fell completely silent, listening intently to the voice on the other end of the line. Her hand gripped the plastic receiver so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. The cheerful atmosphere in the kitchen evaporated instantly. A late fee? An immediate withdrawal from all enrolled classes? My mom stammered, her voice rising in panic. "Sir, please, my husband is coming in this morning with the payment in full. We have the cash ready. Please don't drop his enrollment. We just need a few hours. He's a good student." My mom slowly hung up the phone, missing the cradle on the first try. She turned to face the kitchen table. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the span of 30 seconds. "That was Dean Wallace from the University Financial Office," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly she could barely get the words out. "He said the absolute final grace period ended at midnight on Friday. The automated system flagged Julian's account over the weekend. They are initiating the process to drop him from his courses and revoke his dorm access. Richard, they want the $15,950 plus a mandatory $500 penalty fee by noon today, or he is out. They won't accept a payment plan." My dad stood up abruptly, his wooden chair scraping loudly and aggressively against the floor. "It's fine, Margaret. Don't panic. Harrison has the money right here. We will just drive faster. Julian, go get the envelope from your brother. Let's go." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the coffee pot sputtering on the counter. Julian didn't move an inch. He sat completely frozen, staring blankly at his untouched plate of pancakes, tears welling up in his eyes. "Julian," my dad barked, his voice taking on the harsh, commanding tone he used when managing the production lines at the manufacturing plant. "Go get the money. We do not have time to waste playing games." Julian swallowed hard, an audible gulp in the quiet room. A single tear rolled down his pale cheek and dripped onto his sweatshirt. I can't," he choked out. "What do you mean you can't?" my mom asked, taking a frantic step toward him. "Harrison, where is the money? Just give it to him." I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my leather briefcase resting on the chair next to me. I pulled out the empty brown manila envelope and the thick stack of crumpled, glossy receipts from Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus, and Gucci. I tossed them deliberately into the center of the breakfast table. They slid across the smooth wood and stopped right next to the syrup bottle. "The money is gone," I stated clearly, letting the words drop like heavy concrete blocks. "When I checked the floorboard yesterday morning after returning early from my business trip, the envelope was completely empty. But I did manage to find these buried in the bathroom trash can." My dad frowned, completely confused. He picked up the manila envelope, opening the flap to see nothing but absolute darkness inside. Then he picked up one of the receipts. He pulled his reading glasses down from the top of his head. "Saks Fifth Avenue? $895? What the hell is this?" He looked up, his eyes darting frantically between me and Julian. "Those are the receipts from Julian's weekend shopping spree," I explained, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "He took the 15 grand I saved from my salary, went downtown while I was in Seattle, and blew it on designer clothes, luxury dinners, and VIP tables at clubs to impress his friends. He wanted to play rich." My mom let out a sharp, genuine gasp that echoed off the walls. She covered her mouth with both hands, stumbling backward until her back hit the kitchen counter. No, that's impossible. Julian wouldn't do that. Harrison, you must be mistaken. Did you misplace the money? Julian, tell him he is wrong. Tell him you didn't do this." Julian buried his face in his hands and started sobbing loudly. It wasn't his usual manipulative, calculated crying. It was the ugly, hyperventilating, guttural wail of a cornered animal realizing there was absolutely no escape from the trap. "I'm sorry," he wailed, rocking back and forth in his chair. "I didn't mean to spend all of it. I just took a little bit at first to buy a jacket, and then we went out and I wanted to pay for dinner, and it just got completely out of control. I couldn't stop. I just wanted to feel normal. I just wanted to have nice things like everyone else." My dad stared at him. The betrayal on my father's face was profound and absolute. It wasn't just anger. It was the complete, violent shattering of a 24-year-old illusion. The golden child, the miracle baby, was a common thief. Right at that incredibly tense, explosive moment, the front door swung open without a knock. It was Sylvia, my mom's best friend and our incredibly nosy next-door neighbor. She had a terrible habit of walking in unannounced for morning coffee to share neighborhood gossip about custody battles and impending divorces. "Margaret, you won't believe the drama I just heard about the homeowners association." Sylvia froze dead in the doorway, taking in the horrific scene. The violently sobbing Julian, the horrified, pale parents, and me, sitting perfectly calm with my coffee mug. Sylvia's eyes landed instantly on the designer receipts scattered on the table. She immediately looked incredibly guilty, clutching her purse tightly to her chest. "Oh, I see you finally found out," she muttered nervously, taking a half-step backward toward the door. My mom snapped her head toward Sylvia, her eyes wild. "Found out what? Sylvia, what do you know?" Sylvia backed up another step, looking absolutely terrified of my mother's wrath. "Margaret, I didn't want to say anything because I know how fiercely defensive you get about Julian. But I saw him at the upscale mall downtown on Saturday afternoon. He was carrying an armful of Gucci bags and flashing a huge wad of $100 bills at the food court, buying lunch for a whole group of boys. He told me he got an early inheritance from his grandfather. I just assumed Richard's father had passed and you hadn't told me yet. My grandfather had been dead and buried for 10 years. My mom let out a noise that sounded like a wounded animal. Her own best friend had seen her son squandering stolen money and said absolutely nothing, entirely because my mother had created such a toxic, protective environment where Julian could never, ever be criticized. The enablers were suddenly turning on each other, and the entire system was collapsing. My dad slammed his heavy fist down on the table, making the ceramic plates rattle violently. "You stole from your own brother," he roared at Julian, his face turning a dangerous, mottled shade of purple. "You stole the college fund he broke his back to provide for you, and you bought a damn watch? You bought shoes." Julian flinched, shrinking so far into his chair he looked like a child. "I'll take it back. I'll sell it. I'll get a job, I swear. I'll fix it." "You're damn right you will," my dad snarled, his voice completely devoid of any fatherly warmth. But my mom, still desperately, pathetically clinging to her need to keep the peace and protect her baby, turned her tear-filled eyes toward me. She bypassed Julian's massive crime entirely and focused right on the only person who had ever fixed things in this house. "Harrison," she pleaded, her voice breaking into a million pieces. "Harrison, please. The deadline is noon. If he gets kicked out today, his whole life is ruined. He won't get his degree. He'll be a failure. You have excellent credit. You make a fantastic salary in Boston. Can't you just put it on your credit card for now? Take out a personal loan? We will pay the interest, I swear to God. We can refinance the house. Just save him this one last time. Please, for our family." I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had watched me sacrifice my youth, my savings, and my peace of mind for decades, and her only instinct was to ask me to sacrifice my financial future too. I took a deep breath. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. That was the exact moment I decided to drop the legal bomb. I reached into my leather briefcase one more time. The entire room watched me in terrified, breathless silence as I pulled out the bank deposit slip and the carbon copy of the credit card application I had found stuck inside the envelope. I placed them deliberately, perfectly aligned, on top of the designer receipts. "I can't put it on my credit card, Mom," I said smoothly, my voice cutting through the thick tension like a scalpel. "Because Julian is already trying to do that for me." My dad frowned deeply and picked up the application form. He squinted at the fine print, his lips moving silently as he read the horrific details. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "That is a credit card application for a platinum limit card with a massive APR," I explained, maintaining direct, unblinking eye contact with Julian, who was now trembling so hard his teeth were literally chattering together. He filled it out on Saturday afternoon between his shopping sprees. He listed himself as the primary cardholder, so he gets the plastic. But he used my social security number, my Boston address, and my annual salary to secure the bank's approval. And right there at the bottom, on the dotted line, he forged my signature as the legal guarantor. My mom gasped again, stumbling backward and clutching the edge of the sink for support. He didn't just steal cash, Mom, I continued, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet kitchen. He committed federal identity theft. He committed bank fraud. That is a felony. If he maxes out that card and defaults on the payments, which he absolutely will because he doesn't have a job, the bank comes after my assets. They garnish my wages. They ruin my credit score. They destroy my ability to buy real estate, secure a mortgage, or ever build a life. This isn't a petty family squabble over a few dollars. This is grounds for a massive, ruinous civil lawsuit and potential jail time. My dad dropped the paper onto the table like it was physically burning his fingers. He looked at Julian not as a son, not as a miracle baby, but as a dangerous criminal sitting at his breakfast table. You forged his name? My dad whispered, the pure, unadulterated disgust in his voice cutting deeper than any scream ever could. You actively tried to bankrupt your own brother so you could buy drinks at a club? Julian couldn't even speak. His throat was completely closed up with panic. He just sobbed, nodding his head up and down in a pathetic, agonizing admission of guilt. Please, Harrison, my mom begged, dropping all pretenses, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. Don't call the police. Don't press charges against him. Don't ruin his record. He's your brother. We will fix this. We will sell my car. We will take out a second mortgage on this house. We will cash out my retirement fund. Just please, step in and help us manage this mess. You always know what to do. You always fix it. She was still doing it. Even faced with felony fraud, she was still trying to draft me into her endless war. She was still trying to make me the manager of Julian's catastrophic consequences. Right at that exact second, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, piercing, authoritative sound that completely shattered the heavy emotional fog choking the house. Sylvia, eager to escape the war zone and avoid any further collateral damage, practically ran to the entryway to open the door. A moment later, she returned to the kitchen, followed by a tall, impeccably dressed man in a tailored, charcoal gray bespoke suit. He carried a sleek, expensive leather portfolio under his arm and commanded the room the absolute second he stepped into it. It was Mr. Harrington, the CEO of my tech firm. My parents stared at him, completely bewildered. Julian stopped crying for a fraction of a second, staring with red, puffy eyes at the incredibly wealthy executive standing in our modest, linoleum-floored kitchen. The contrast was jarring. Harrison, Mr. Harrington smiled warmly, completely ignoring the thick tension and the crying younger brother in the room. I know it's incredibly early, and I sincerely apologize for dropping by your parents' house unannounced like this. But I had an early morning flight out of the regional airport nearby, and I wanted to hand-deliver this to you personally before I left the state. He opened his leather portfolio and pulled out a thick, high-quality document folder embossed with the company logo. He handed it to me with a firm nod. The board of directors approved everything late last night, Mr. Harrington announced, his voice booming with corporate authority. The vice president position is officially yours. And along with the promotion comes the new executive compensation package, the massive stock options, and the full relocation budget. My mom blinked, completely thrown off guard, her tears momentarily pausing. Vice President? Relocation. Mr. Harrington turned to my parents with a polite, professional, entirely oblivious smile. You must be incredibly proud of your son. Harrison is one of the most brilliant, dedicated engineers we have ever had the privilege of employing. He essentially rebuilt our entire back-end architecture single-handedly over the last 2 years. We are officially moving him to our West Coast headquarters in Silicon Valley to lead the new division. He told me he already broke his apartment lease in Boston. We have him scheduled to fly out next week to start his new life. The absolute, deafening silence that followed that statement was the single most satisfying sound I have ever experienced in my 29 years of existence. My dad's jaw literally dropped. My mom's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Julian looked like he had just been struck directly by lightning. They realized all at once exactly what this meant. I wasn't just refusing to pay the tuition today. I was leaving. I had quietly secured a massive promotion, a huge salary bump, and I was physically relocating thousands of miles away. I had completely severed the financial umbilical cord while they weren't looking. I wasn't their permanent safety net anymore. I was a ghost. You're moving away? My mom stammered, her hands trembling violently. Next week? To California? But what about Julian? What about the tuition today? Who is going to help us sort this out? I took the customized pen Mr. Harrington offered me, signed the executive contract on the kitchen counter, and handed the folder back to him. Thank you, sir. I look forward to starting the new role. I appreciate you coming all this way. See you in California, Harrison. Enjoy the rest of your week with your family. Mr. Harrington nodded. He politely excused himself, sensing the intense family drama boiling just beneath the surface, and let himself out the front door, the lock clicking solidly behind him. When the door shut, the reality of the situation crashed down on the kitchen like a collapsing roof. Harrison, my dad said, his voice cracking with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. You are abandoning us? You're just walking away. I am saving myself, Dad. I corrected him firmly, packing my laptop back into my briefcase. I am stepping off the sinking ship you two have spent 24 years deliberately drilling holes into. I am not taking out a personal loan. I am not calling the school to beg for an extension. I am canceling that fraudulent credit card application, and I am absolutely not fixing Julian's life anymore. My flight is on Thursday. Until then, I suggest you figure out how to handle the criminal sitting at your table. My dad looked at me. He looked deep into the unshakable, cold resolve in my eyes. Then, he slowly turned his head to look at Julian, who was trembling violently in his chair. The fight completely drained out of my father's shoulders. He realized finally that I was absolutely right. Saving Julian from his own messes had never actually helped him. It had only taught him how to be a more efficient, entitled parasite. My dad walked heavily over to the kitchen counter, picked up the cordless phone, and slammed it down on the table right in front of Julian. Call them, my dad ordered, his voice completely devoid of any warmth, affection, or pity. Julian stared at the phone like it was a venomous snake. Call who? Call Dean Wallace, my dad said coldly, crossing his arms. Right now, while I am standing here watching you. You tell him you cannot make the payment. You tell him you are officially withdrawing from all your classes for the semester because you are a thief. Dad, no! Julian shrieked, sheer panic gripping his throat. Please, if I drop out, I lose my dorm. I lose my meal plan. I lose my friends. I lose everything. Call them, my dad roared, his voice violently shaking the kitchen windows. Or I will physically drag you down to the police station myself and file a felony report for identity theft against your own brother. Pick up the damn phone. Julian's hand shook violently as he picked up the receiver and dialed the university's number. We all stood there in absolute silence, watching the untouchable golden child finally face the executioner. Hi. Yes. Dean Wallace, please. Julian whispered into the phone, thick tears streaming down his face, destroying his perfect complexion. This is Julian Wilson. I can't make my tuition payment today. Yes. I understand the penalty. I need to withdraw for the term. He listened for a moment, his shoulders shaking with silent, agonizing sobs. Yes, I understand I have to vacate the dorm by Friday, Julian choked out, his voice barely audible. He slowly placed the receiver back on the cradle. He looked around the room, completely and utterly shattered. The pedestal was gone. The safety net was gone. He was finally standing on his own 2 feet, and the ground was made of jagged, broken glass. I thought that would be the end of it. But the real punishment was only just beginning. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was brutal, humiliating, and entirely necessary for his survival. My dad didn't let Julian wallow in his self-pity for even a single second. The golden era of coddling and endless second chances was officially dead and buried. Go upstairs right now, my dad commanded, pointing a stiff finger toward the hallway. Pack up every single thing you bought this weekend. The silk shirts, the shoes, that ridiculous oversized watch. Put it back in the bags. Bring it all down. We are driving to the mall right now, and you are returning every last piece of it to pay your brother back. For the first time in his entire entitled life, Julian didn't argue. He didn't whine. He didn't look to our mother for a bailout. He just nodded numbly, completely defeated, and dragged himself heavily up the stairs. That afternoon, I watched from the kitchen window as my dad forced Julian into his old, beat-up sedan. The trunk was fully loaded with those high-end, glossy designer bags. It was a deeply humiliating tour of apologies. From what my dad told me later that evening, Julian had to walk into those pristine, brightly lit luxury boutiques, face the exact same cashiers he had arrogantly tipped with $100 bills just the day before, and pathetically beg for refunds. Some of the returns actually worked. The clothes with the tags still firmly attached were accepted, though the hefty restocking fees ate significantly into the cash total. But the real catastrophic disaster happened at the boutique where he bought the massive gold watch. When they walked into the store, Julian timidly placed the heavy velvet box on the pristine glass counter. The manager, a sharp-eyed, no-nonsense guy named Matteo, opened the box and inspected the watch carefully under a bright LED jeweler's loupe. Matteo's face hardened. He shook his head and closed the box with a sharp snap. "I can't process a refund for this item," Matteo said flatly, sliding the box back across the counter. "There are deep, visible scratches along the bottom of the clasp, and the protective factory film has been completely removed. You clearly wore it out to a club or a party. It's considered used, damaged merchandise now. Store policy is final." Julian begged. He pleaded frantically. He explained that his life was completely ruined, that he had dropped out of college, that he needed the money to pay back a debt. Matteo remained entirely unmoved. He just pointed to the heavy brass sign detailing the strict return policy and asked them to leave the premises before he called mall security to escort them out. They returned home at dusk. Julian looked physically ill. His skin was pale and he looked like he was going to throw up. He walked slowly into the kitchen and placed the scratched gold watch on the counter. It was the last remaining symbol of his disastrous spending spree, and it was entirely worthless to him now. Out of the $15,950 he had stolen, they had only managed to recover about $4,200. "I'll try to sell it online," Julian whispered softly, staring blankly at the watch. "Maybe someone will buy it for half price." "Good," my dad nodded, pouring himself a tall glass of tap water. "And tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. sharp, you are hitting the pavement to find a full-time job. You are going to pay your brother back every single dime with interest before he flies to California. And you will pay rent to live in this house from now on. The free ride is permanently over." As Julian turned to go to his room, head hung low, I stopped him. I had one final, crucial loose end to tie up before I left this house forever. "How did you get into my room, Julian?" I asked quietly, leaning against the counter. "I securely locked the door before I left for Seattle. The lock wasn't forced, and the windows were bolted." Julian froze on the bottom step of the stairs. He looked absolutely terrified to answer. I found a spare." "Where?" my dad demanded, stepping forward, his anger flaring up again. Julian swallowed hard, looking at the floor. "Aunt Beatrice. She came over on Friday afternoon to borrow some sugar while Mom was out. I told her Harrison locked his door and I needed to get my old gaming console out of his closet for the weekend. She laughed, said Harrison was being ridiculously paranoid as always, and gave me the spare key she keeps in her purse for family emergencies. She told me I deserved to have some fun while he was gone, since he makes so much money. Aunt Beatrice, my mom's older sister, the ultimate enabler, the woman who constantly whispered toxic garbage in Julian's ear, telling him that he was the special one, the face of the family, and that I was just the boring workhorse destined to pay the bills. She was the absolute architect of his entitlement. My dad didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. He picked up his cell phone and furiously dialed Beatrice's number. When she answered with a cheerful hello, he didn't even greet her. "Beatrice, listen to me very carefully," my dad growled into the phone, his voice dripping with pure, concentrated venom. "You gave Julian the key to Harrison's room. He used it to steal $15,000 in cash and commit felony fraud. You are no longer welcome in this house. If you show up on my property, I will have the police arrest you for trespassing. If you call my wife, I will file a restraining order for harassment. You are permanently cut off." He aggressively hung up the phone before she could even utter a single gasp of protest. He blocked her number immediately. The toxic support system that had shielded Julian from reality for his entire life was being systematically dismantled, brick by brick. That night, around midnight, I was sitting in my room, packing up cardboard boxes for my move to the West Coast. The house was completely silent. Then, I heard soft, hesitant footsteps pause outside my bedroom door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. A piece of lined notebook paper slid slowly under the gap of the door, followed by 3 crisp $20 bills. I picked up the paper. There was no cheap cologne sprayed on it. There were no manipulative teardrops deliberately staining the ink. Just simple, messy handwriting. "I know you hate me. You have every single right to. I am not asking you to fix this. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I will make it right. Here is $60. It's from selling my concert tickets online today. It's a start." I stared at the $60. I felt a strange, incredibly quiet sensation wash over my entire body. For once in my entire adult life, I didn't feel the overwhelming, suffocating urge to open the door, hug him, and tell him everything was going to be okay. I didn't feel the desperate need to be the hero. I didn't feel like the fixer. I felt like a witness. Down the hall, I heard him crying in his room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a performance for an audience. It was raw, quiet, and completely real. And for the very first time, I didn't go to comfort him. I let the heavy, dark silence do what my endless lectures and my money never could. Because letting him suffer the consequences of his own actions wasn't cruelty. It was the only way he would ever learn what love without rescue truly looked like. For weeks later, the atmosphere in the Wilson house was entirely unrecognizable. There were no more violently slammed doors, no more late-night whispering in the kitchen about missing tuition deadlines, no more toxic secrets buried under the floorboards. The house just sounded like harsh, unfiltered reality. My dad had strictly kept his word. The morning after the massive confrontation, Julian had walked 3 miles into town in the freezing rain and applied at every single business on Main Street. He had landed a grueling job at a small, independent coffee shop downtown. It wasn't glamorous. It was the kind of place where every complex order was scribbled frantically on paper cups. The espresso machines constantly leaked boiling water, and tips were painfully earned one exhausted smile at a time. The first night he came home from his shift, he walked through the front door at 7 p.m. His clothes were heavily stained with sour milk. His hands were burned, and he smelled strongly of roasted espresso beans and cheap vanilla sugar syrup. He looked physically exhausted, his feet dragging heavily on the floorboards. But he didn't complain. He didn't ask my mom for a foot rub or demand a special dinner. He just walked silently into the kitchen, dropped exactly $62 in crumpled, sticky tip money onto the counter, and looked at me. "It's not much," Julian said quietly, his voice raspy from calling out coffee orders all day. "But it's honest work. My dad nodded approvingly from the kitchen table. My mom just smiled weakly. She looked proud of his effort, but also deeply broken at the exact same time, finally grieving the absolute loss of her perfect little illusion. Every single Saturday after that, Julian handed me a plain white envelope with whatever money he could manage to scrape together. Sometimes it was $100 from picking up extra, exhausting shifts. Sometimes it was less. I never counted it in front of him. I just took the envelope, thanked him formally, and wrote the updated total on a yellow sticky note pinned to the fridge. The number grew agonizingly slowly, but the incredibly important thing was that it grew consistently. We also finally started family therapy in late October, just before I was scheduled to finalize my move to Silicon Valley. We went to an office downtown run by a no-nonsense therapist named Dr. Eris. The office smelled intensely like peppermint tea and old, dusty carpet. At first, the sessions were painfully awkward and silent. Everyone sat on opposite sides of the room, staring at the walls, terrified to speak first. But week by week, the heavy defensive walls started crumbling, and honest, painful words started finding their way across the space. My mom finally broke down in tears and admitted she had entirely mistaken protecting Julian from failure for actually loving him. My dad confessed, with heavy tears in his own eyes, that he had leaned on me entirely too much to keep the family steady, treating me like an adult financial provider since I was 10 years old. And I sat in that uncomfortable chair and admitted out loud that I had deeply liked being the fixer. I was addicted to the validation. It made me feel useful and necessary, right up until the exact moment it completely destroyed my life and my savings. Julian didn't say much during that first grueling month of therapy. He mostly just sat in the corner and listened, silently absorbing the absolute wreckage his entitlement and theft had caused his family. But one day, during our final session before my flight, he looked up at Dr. Eris and said something that silenced the entire room. "I never learned how to be sorry without expecting someone to immediately rescue me," Julian said quietly, staring intently at his calloused hands. "I just thought apologies were a quick transaction to get my credit card turned back on and the yelling to stop." Even Dr. Eris didn't say anything to that. He just nodded slowly, letting the heavy, profound truth hang there in the air until it felt completely solid. By December, months after I had officially moved to California and comfortably started my new role as vice president, Julian had meticulously repaid nearly $6,000 of the massive debt. The rest would take years, but he was remarkably steady. He had applied for readmission to the university for the upcoming spring semester, but this time he did it entirely on his own. He created his own strict budget plan, secured a small student loan entirely in his own name, and arranged his rigorous class schedule around his demanding part-time work hours. Then came the final twist, the one that proved he was actually genuinely changing. Over a weekly phone call, my mom mentioned that Julian had secured a second job doing tedious data entry to pay me back faster. When I asked where he was working, she named a mid-sized tech firm in Boston. It was the exact company run by Derek, my old cutthroat corporate rival. Julian had absolutely no idea about my toxic history with Derek. But the irony was incredibly beautiful. Julian was now working at the very bottom of the corporate ladder, facing the exact same grueling, unforgiving standards I had survived for years. He was walking directly in my shadow, learning the brutal value of hard work the hard way. I didn't tell him. I let him earn his own stripes in the corporate trenches. On a bright, crisp Sunday morning in March, I flew back to Boston to finalize the sale of my old apartment and gather the last of my belongings. I stopped by the family house to say my final goodbyes. The rhythm in the house finally felt clean. My mom had completely stopped hovering. My dad was laughing again, building furniture in his garage, and I finally stopped walking on eggshells, no longer waiting for the next inevitable disaster to strike. As I was loading my rental car in the driveway, Julian walked out. He was wearing his stiff work uniform, getting ready for a double shift. He handed me one last, thick envelope, his biggest cash repayment yet, and a small, neatly wrapped gift bag. I opened the bag right there in the cold air. Inside was a cheap wooden frame holding a faded photograph. It was a picture of the two of us as little kids in the backyard. We were both covered in mud, grinning wildly, with our arms thrown affectionately around each other's shoulders. I turned the frame over. There was a note taped securely to the back. Simple handwriting, no expensive perfume, no manipulation. "Thank you for letting me fall," the note read. "You made me stand up. You taught me how to save myself." I stared at the note for a very long time, standing in the driveway. All the remaining anger, the deep resentment, the utter exhaustion I had carried for 29 years finally evaporated into the crisp March air. What I had done to him wasn't revenge. It was restoration. And somehow, seeing him walk to his old car to go to work, that felt infinitely better than just winning an argument. I placed the framed photo carefully in the passenger seat of my rental car, right next to the small piece of oak floorboard I had kept as a reminder. A reminder not of the money I lost, but of the boundary that changed absolutely everything. Sometimes, the most profound act of love isn't the hand that frantically reaches out to catch you when you stumble. Sometimes, true love is the absolute, terrifying silence that lets you fall just far enough to hit the bottom, so you finally learn how to climb back up entirely on your own. If you have ever had to make that agonizingly hard choice, to help someone you love, or to finally let them go so they can grow, tell me in the comments below. Hit like if you believe in the kind of tough love that actually heals instead of hurts, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Thank you so much for listening.